3 miles below the Atlantic, in a darkness so thick it feels like a physical weight, camera lights pierce the gloom to reveal a nightmare in twisted steel. This is the USS Scorpion, a nuclear-powered predator that didn't just sink. It vanished from the face of the Earth at the height of the Cold War. In May 1968, 99 sailors were swallowed by the abyss, leaving behind nothing but frantic questions and a grieving nation. For 15 agonizing years, the Scorpion was a ghost story, a name etched on a memorial wall. But when the Navy finally located the wreckage, the cameras captured something that shouldn't exist: a massive hull torn into 4 jagged pieces, scattered across the seafloor like a child's broken toy. Most chilling of all, a single running light was still extended, a final desperate signal from a crew that knew the end was coming. The official reports called it a tragic accident, but the twisted metal speaks of a much more violent, internal betrayal. Tonight we are descending back into the crushing dark. We're stripping away the classified layers to find out what really killed the Scorpion and why the truth remains buried 3 miles deep. The descent to the Scorpion's final resting place is a journey through a liquid void, a place where the crushing weight of the Atlantic reaches over 6,000 pounds per square inch. When the lights of the deep-sea research vessel finally hit the bottom, they didn't find a ship. They found a forensic crime scene, frozen in time 3 miles down. The debris field spans nearly 3,000 feet of the ocean floor, a haunting trail of evidence that tells a story of a violent multi-stage execution. The first thing that emerges from the silt is the bow section. It sits upright, buried deep in the soft sediment, looking almost dignified, like a silent sentinel guarding its own grave. But as the cameras move closer, the dignity vanishes. The torpedo room's hull plating is pinched inward in a bizarre, jagged pattern. To the trained eyes of forensic investigators, this was the first clue that the Navy's official accidental narrative was standing on shaky ground. This wasn't the uniform crushing of a hollow tube. It was the result of a localized, catastrophic failure that had overwhelmed the compartment's structural integrity long before the rest of the ship gave up the ghost. Inside those tubes sat the submarine's own teeth, Mark 45 nuclear-tipped torpedoes still sealed in their brass-muzzled homes, waiting for a command that would never come. Moving aft, the scene shifts from tragedy to total annihilation. The operations compartment, the nerve center where Commander Slattery and his officers would have spent their final moments fighting to save their boat, is simply gone. It didn't just sink, it was obliterated. The debris from this section lies scattered in a massive fan pattern across hundreds of yards. Navigation consoles, encryption gear, and the personal effects of 99 men were blown outward by a violent decompression so powerful it turned the submarine's brain into shrapnel. But it is the engine room that stops investigators cold. In the history of maritime disasters, few images are as terrifying as the Scorpion's stern. This 50-foot section of high-grade military steel was compressed forward into the auxiliary machinery space, like a giant metal accordion. The forces required to telescope a nuclear submarine's hull into itself are almost beyond human comprehension. It suggests a death spiral, a sequence where the ship was falling vertically tail first at terminal velocity before the laws of physics finally tore it apart. Then there is the reactor. The S-5W nuclear heart of the Scorpion, designed to withstand the most extreme combat conditions imaginable, was thrown completely free of the hull. It lies on its side, discarded in the silt like a rusted barrel. It is a chilling testament to the violence of the ship's final seconds that the very core of the vessel was ripped from its mounts and tossed aside, while the surrounding compartments were crushed into unrecognizable scrap. Amidst this carnage lies the sail, the iconic tower of the submarine. It rests on its port side, detached and lonely. And there, captured in the stark glare of the submersible's lamps, is the most haunting detail of the entire wreck, the running light. It is still extended. In the world of submariners, you only extend those lights when you're on the surface or desperately trying to get there. It is a silent, glowing witness to the crew's final struggle. Did Slattery try an emergency blow? Was this an attempt to signal for help in the seconds before the Atlantic claimed them? As Dr. John Craven and his team of analysts pored over these initial photographs, a sense of deep unease began to settle over the Pentagon. The sediment analysis showed no external impact craters. There were no scorch marks from a Soviet torpedo, no evidence of a collision with an underwater mountain. The wreckage was screaming a truth that the officials weren't ready to hear. The killer hadn't come from the outside. The Scorpion had been betrayed by her own systems. Every twisted piece of metal, every telescoped bulkhead, and that single lonely running light pointed toward a catastrophe that started within the skin of the ship itself. The ocean floor had preserved the evidence of a mechanical heart attack, a failure so fundamental that it turned a billion-dollar weapon of war into a steel coffin in less than 5 minutes. The dead may be silent, but their wreckage speaks with a deafening roar to those brave enough to descend and listen. To understand the violence found at the bottom of the Atlantic, one must look beyond the twisted steel and into the shadow-drenched world of May 1968. This wasn't a time of peace. It was a global geopolitical chessboard where the stakes weren't just lives, but the survival of civilizations. Under the waves, a silent, invisible war was being waged, a deadly game of cat and mouse, where nuclear submarines were the ultimate pawns. To the families waiting in Norfolk, the Scorpion was a vessel bringing their husbands home. To the Pentagon, she was a high-tech sensory organ, an invisible ear pressed against the hull of the Soviet war machine. The year 1968 remains one of the most volatile chapters in human history, a year of the crisis that pushed the world to the brink of nuclear midnight. Just months before the Scorpion vanished, the USS Pueblo had been seized by North Korea, a humiliating blow to American prestige. The Vietnam War was hemorrhaging blood and resources, and the Tet Offensive had shattered the illusion of a quick victory. But it was in the silent depths of the Pacific where the most ominous omen occurred. The Soviet Gulf II-class submarine K-129 had mysteriously exploded and sunk, taking 98 Soviet sailors to a watery grave. The atmosphere between the superpowers wasn't just cold, it was electrified with paranoia. Every sonar ping was a potential threat. Every unexplained shadow on the radar was a possible act of war. It was into this pressure cooker that the USS Scorpion sailed. Led by Commander Francis Slattery, the crew of 99 were seasoned professionals, the silent service elite. They had spent months in the Mediterranean, conducting grueling NATO exercises and shadowing Soviet vessels with the predatory grace of an apex killer. By mid-May, they were tired. They were homesick. They were heading west, dreaming of the Virginia coastline and the wives and children they hadn't seen in months. But in the world of clandestine intelligence, home is a destination that can be canceled with a single encrypted burst. On May 17th, as the Scorpion prepared for her final leg home, new orders crackled over the secure radio circuits. Naval intelligence had detected a Soviet naval task group maneuvering near the Canary Islands, an Echo II-class nuclear attack submarine, accompanied by a Kotlin-class destroyer and an auxiliary vessel. Scorpion was the closest American asset. Her mission was simple in theory, but perilous in practice: break off from her transit, intercept the Soviet group, and gather everything: photographs of their deck configurations, recordings of their propeller signatures, and intercepts of their electronic communications. In the jargon of the era, these were northern runs, high-stakes surveillance missions that required submarine commanders to operate on the razor's edge. To get the intelligence the Pentagon craved, Slattery had to get close, dangerously close. He had to penetrate the Soviet screening vessels, slip underneath their sonar umbrellas, and remain a ghost. It was a game of nerves where the wrong move could trigger a diplomatic nightmare or a localized skirmish that could escalate into World War III. The Soviets were more alert than ever, reeling from the loss of their own K-129 and desperate to prove their naval dominance. But there was another factor playing into this deadly game, one that wouldn't be fully understood for decades. The Scorpion herself was a boat in distress. Due to the frantic operational tempo of the Cold War, her 1967 overhaul had been dangerously abbreviated. To keep more submarines on patrol, the Navy had deferred critical sub-safe modifications, the very safety upgrades designed to prevent the kind of catastrophic flooding that had claimed the USS Thresher years earlier. She was a nuclear-powered thoroughbred, being pushed to its limits while its safety systems were stuck in the past. Commander Slattery's final position report arrived at 1:15 p.m. on May 21st. The message was routine, reporting normal operations and an estimated arrival in Norfolk on May 27th. There was no hint of fear, no mention of Soviet aggression, and no warning of mechanical failure. But as the Scorpion dove back under the swells to continue her covert watch, she was walking into a trap set by time technology and the unforgiving laws of the deep. Somewhere between the Canary Islands and the Azores, the cat-and-mouse game reached its terrifying conclusion. Whether it was a Soviet torpedo retaliating for K-129 or a mechanical heart failure within the Scorpion's own hull, the silence that followed that final broadcast would last for 15 years. The stage was set for a disaster that would not only claim 99 lives, but would leave a permanent scar on the soul of the United States Navy. At exactly 6:59 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time on May 20 the world above the waves remained blissfully unaware of the tragedy unfolding beneath. In the Atlantic, the sun was still high, and at the Navy's headquarters in Norfolk, officials were checking arrival schedules for a homecoming celebration just days away. But 3 miles down on the jagged mountain ranges of the seafloor, the Navy's secret ears, the Sound Surveillance System, or SOSUS, picked up a series of acoustic events that would haunt analysts for decades. This wasn't the sound of a ship sailing. It was the sound of a nuclear predator dying. The acoustic signature began not with a roar, but with a sharp, violent pulse. To the hydrophone arrays hidden on the ocean floor, it sounded like a muffled explosion, followed by a terrifying sequence of metallic groans. Modern analysis suggests this was the initial event, the moment the Scorpion's watertight integrity was first compromised. Whether it was a hot-run torpedo exploding in its tube or a catastrophic failure of a trash disposal unit, the result was the same. The Atlantic Ocean, under immense pressure, had found a way in. For the 99 men aboard, those first few seconds would have been a blur of screaming alarms and the deafening roar of high-pressure seawater. In the close quarters of a skipjack-class submarine, there is no safe place when the hull is breached. Commander Slattery would have immediately ordered an emergency blow, a desperate attempt to force high-pressure air into the ballast tanks to to rocket the ship toward the surface. This matches the haunting evidence of the extended running light found years later. They were fighting to reach the air, fighting to give their families a homecoming that was rapidly slipping away. But the Scorpion wasn't rising. She was heavy, her compartments filling with thousands of tons of freezing seawater. The acoustic data records a period of roughly 5 minutes, a staggering, agonizing window of time, where the crew was alive, conscious, and aware that their world was tilting into the abyss. Analysts believe the submarine may have performed a frantic 180-degree turn, a standard emergency pull-out maneuver used to disable a runaway torpedo. But gravity and pressure are enemies that don't care about tactics. As the Scorpion sank past her test depth of 700 feet, the hull began to scream. High-yield steel is designed to flex, but every inch deeper added thousands of pounds of pressure to every square inch of the boat. At 1,000 feet, the rivets and pipes would have begun to fail, spraying lethal jets of water like liquid knives through the compartments. By the time she crossed the 300-foot mark, the laws of physics took absolute control. This was crushed depth, the invisible line, where the structural strength of the submarine finally loses its war against the ocean. The end, when it came, lasted less than a fraction of a second. At approximately 1,530 feet, the cylindrical pressure hull collapsed in on itself with the force of a massive explosion. But this wasn't an explosion. It was an implosion. The air inside the submarine was compressed so violently and so quickly that it momentarily reached temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. In a heartbeat, the operations compartment disintegrated, and the engine room telescoped forward like a collapsing soda can, and the 99 men were gone. They didn't drown. The transition from life to death happened faster than the human nervous system can process pain. The SOSUS stations recorded 15 distinct acoustic pulses after the main collapse. The sounds of individual bulkheads and internal tanks popping as the wreckage began its long 3-mile fall to the sea floor. The Scorpion was no longer a ship. She was a collection of heavy debris tumbling through the lightless void at terminal velocity. The bow hit first, plowing a massive crater into the soft sediment. Then came the stern, hitting with such force that it skidded across the bottom before coming to rest. Finally, the silence returned to the North Atlantic, a silence that would remain unbroken for 15 years. Those 5 minutes of terror are the most scrutinized moments in naval history. They represent the ultimate nightmare of every submariner, a frantic mechanical struggle against an invisible, overwhelming force. For the families, the knowledge of those 5 minutes is a heavy burden. It means their loved ones didn't disappear in an instant. They fought. They executed their drills, they stood at their stations, and they looked into the eyes of their brothers in arms as the Atlantic closed in. The wreckage on the seafloor is a monument to that struggle, a steel testament to the final desperate 5 minutes of the USS Scorpion. If the wreckage on the seafloor is a forensic crime scene, then the official investigation that followed was the first attempt to seal the case file forever. In the immediate aftermath of the loss, the U.S. Navy convened a court of inquiry, but the results were as murky as the depths where the Scorpion lay. The final report concluded that the cause was undeterminable, a bureaucratic shrug that satisfied no one, least of all the families of the 99 men who had vanished. But behind the classified curtain of the Pentagon, a much more disturbing picture was being painted, one that suggested the Navy knew exactly what killed the Scorpion, and they were desperate to keep that truth from the public. The most enduring and terrifying theory is the hot-run torpedo. Deep within the Scorpion's torpedo room sat the Mark 37, a sophisticated but temperamental acoustic homing weapon. Intelligence and acoustic data from the SOSUS network revealed a strange detail. Just before the initial explosion, the Scorpion made a radical 180-degree turn. In the grim calculus of submarine warfare, this is the standard emergency pull-out maneuver. If a torpedo accidentally activates or runs hot inside its tube, it begins to seek a target. By turning the ship 180 degrees, the commander triggers a safety mechanism in the torpedo designed to disable it when it senses its own mothership as the target. The acoustic tapes suggest Commander Slattery was doing exactly that. He was fighting a rogue weapon in his own bow. But the theory suggests the safety failed. The torpedo may have exploded while still inside the tube, or it may have exited the ship and circled back with lethal precision. This would explain the inward-pinched hull plating the cameras found years later, a betrayal by the ship's own teeth. If the Navy admitted that a faulty torpedo design had killed 99 of its best men, the entire Mark 37 program would have been grounded, and the Navy's primary offensive capability during the Cold War would have been paralyzed. It was a truth too expensive to tell. Then, there is the SubSafe scandal, the institutional failure that turned the Scorpion into a ticking time bomb. Following the loss of the USS Thresher in 1963, the Navy established the SubSafe program, a rigorous set of safety modifications designed to ensure a submarine could always surface in an emergency. But by 1968, the Cold War was at a fever pitch. The Navy was desperate for hulls in the water. To save time and money, the Scorpion was pushed through an abbreviated 1967 overhaul in Norfolk. Critical safety upgrades were deferred. Her emergency blow system, the very thing the crew would have reached for in their final moments, was known to be unreliable. The Navy had sent 99 men to the front lines of an invisible war in a ship they knew was substandard. Admitting this wouldn't just be a scandal, it would be a confession of institutional negligence. Of course, the shadow of the Soviet Union looms over every theory. For decades, whispers of a tit-for-tat sinking have circulated. The theory suggests that the Scorpion was intercepted and sunk by the Soviet task group she was spying on, a retaliation for the loss of the Soviet K-1 and 29 earlier that year. Proponents of this theory point to the abrupt termination of the original inquiry and the missing acoustic tapes as evidence of a massive cover-up designed to prevent World War III. If a Soviet submarine had sunk an American ship, the U.S. would have been forced to retaliate, potentially triggering a nuclear exchange. To keep the peace, the Scorpion may have been sacrificed to the silence of history. Even the way the wreck was surveyed in the 1980s was shrouded in deception. When Dr. Robert Ballard led the expedition that eventually found the Titanic, the public saw a triumphant moment of oceanographic discovery. What they didn't know was that Ballard's mission was a front. He was actually working for the Navy using the Titanic as cover to conduct a highly classified survey of the Scorpion and the Thresher. The Navy wanted to know the condition of the nuclear reactors and the weapons, but they wanted to do it without the world or the families watching. For over 50 years, the families of the Scorpion's crew have fought for the truth. They have submitted petitions, filed Freedom of Information Act requests, and demanded that the Navy reopen the investigation. In 2012, a formal request backed by submarine experts was flatly denied without public review. The Navy's stance remains unchanged. The case is closed. But in the world of intelligence and power, closed often means buried. the Scorpion continues to rest 3 miles down a tomb of secrets where the evidence of mechanical failure, rogue weapons, and Cold War paranoia is preserved in the crushing dark, waiting for a day when the truth is no longer a threat to the institutions that sent her there. Today, the USS Scorpion remains a steel tomb, a silent monument resting in the perpetual twilight of the deep Atlantic. For over half a century, the crushing pressure that claimed her life has also served as her protector, keeping the bodies of 99 American sailors and the secrets of their final moments locked away from a world that has moved on. The wreckage has become a paradox. It is simultaneously one of the most scrutinized disaster sites in naval history and one of the least understood. While the nuclear reactor will remain dangerous for centuries and the hull will slowly succumb to the slow creep of corrosion, the questions surrounding her loss remain as sharp and painful as they were in 1968. For the families of the fallen, the Scorpion isn't just a Cold War mystery or a forensic puzzle. She is a void that never filled. They are the wives who raise children alone, the sons who only know their fathers through grainy black and white photographs, and the veterans who still wonder if it could have been them. To these families, the Navy's silence isn't just a matter of national security. It is a lingering betrayal. They buried empty caskets and accepted folded flags, but they were never given the one thing that might have brought them peace, the unvarnished truth. They know that in the high-stakes world of military intelligence, justice delayed is often justice denied, and that the silent service sometimes remains silent for the wrong reasons. The legacy of the Scorpion is written in the blood of her crew, but it is also seen in every modern submarine that sails today. The hard-learned lessons of her disappearance led to radical shifts in how we build and maintain the vessels that haunt the deep. Today's submariners are protected by redundant safety systems and rigorous oversight that were born from the tragedy of May 1968. In that sense, the sacrifice of the 99 was not in vain. They paid the ultimate price to ensure that others would not have to. But the shadow of the Scorpion still looms over the Pentagon, a reminder that the price of keeping a nation safe often involves secrets that are too heavy for the public to bear. As the currents of the Atlantic sweep over the broken hull of SSN 589, the ship keeps her secrets well. She remains a haunting reminder of a time when the world stood on the brink and when the men who served in the shadows were often the first to fall. The ocean may have claimed the ship, but it is up to us to ensure that the memory of the men who sailed her does not vanish into the same darkness. If you believe that the stories of those who served in the silent service deserve to be remembered, and if you want to join us as we continue to dive into the greatest mysteries of our history and the deep, please consider subscribing to the channel. By joining our community, you help us keep these stories alive and demand the truth for those who can no longer speak for themselves. Thank you for watching and for helping us honor the memory of the USS Scorpion.